Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In our last video, we talked about why Asajj Ventress' return in the Bad Batch is a bit surprising, given the fact that she, has a clearly documented death in the Dark Disciple story arc. Her partner and lover, Quinlan Vos, it's a long story about how that happened, literally puts her into the ground with the rest of her slain Night Sisters. She died, but as Mark Hamill famously says all the time,
no one's ever really gone.
Especially in Star Wars. Now, in that last video, I made a mistake. I pointed out that the shot of Asajj Ventress we see in the Bad Batch trailer has her wearing a pauldron on her left shoulder. I originally thought that this was an Imperial cog. I really hated this idea of Asajj Ventress returning to the Empire, to the dark side, to Darth Sidious after all he did to her and her people. Just wouldn't make sense as far as her character arc goes. But as some of you guys pointed out, this is actually not an Imperial cog. If you freeze frame the shot, you can clearly see a much more squiggly looking shape. The Empire, being the fascists that they are, do not like squiggly unnatural lines. They want perfect symmetry. So I did a little bit more research. During the latter seasons of the Clone Wars TV show, after Asajj Ventress loses all of her Night Sister clan, she becomes a bounty hunter and she adorns a piece of shoulder armor that looks just like this. And on it is this squiggly line, which is her sigil, the venomous sperm. Okay, joking, it's actually just a serpent or a snake. And it's actually a really important symbol that kind of shows us how Asajj Ventress has changed, how she's transitioned from the Sith Assassin to the bounty hunter we will see in the Bad Batch series. You see, Asajj Ventress was exploited from a very young age. As a baby, when she needed to be loved and coddled, nurtured, and nothing else, she was instead sold off as a slave in order to save her people. She would then be trained as a living weapon. First for that crime boss who had bought her, then by the Jedi who rescued her, and then by the Sith who recruited her, and finally, even her own people, the Dathomiri, would use her as a weapon. For Asajj Ventress' entire life, she was always being pushed into battles and fights that she really had no business being involved with. But still, she would fight because she believed that was the only way she could win acceptance and safety. She believed that the only value she could contribute to her various relationships was by fighting and killing. We can't really blame her for this, of course. She was never properly taken care of as a child. She never developed normal relationships with people that allowed her to feel safe and taken care of. She never developed the proper self-esteem to recognize that she did have value. And we see this dynamic a lot in child soldiers here in our own world, and in many of the child soldiers employed by the Jedi, like Anakin Skywalker. And so behind that tough demeanor, that sultry smile and physical prowess, is just a small Asajj Ventress, a child who's been forced to cover herself up in as much armor as possible so that she can survive the inevitable betrayal that she has grown accustomed to. Betrayal was something she could never escape until she finally realized that the only way to find peace and true acceptance was to stop living her life for someone else's cause or ideology, and instead start to live for herself. And this was something that Asajj Ventress could only begin to understand when she finally let go of that burning hatred and anger she had acquired as a discarded youth. That anger had made her vulnerable. It blinded her, made her unable to think rationally, and other people would take advantage of that. Dooku, more than anyone, would feed off of her anger and make her increasingly a slave to her emotions. When Asajj Ventress finally leaves the Sith and the Night Sister behind, she's like an individual who's escaped an extreme religious cult or some extreme political ideology. And now, as an independent bounty hunter all on her own, driven only by what her needs are, she finally begins to live for herself for the first time in her life. And she also begins to pick up the old skills and abilities she's learned along the way. She begins to realize that the Jedi and the Sith were both wrong in their understanding and application of the Force. One does not need to become a slave to the Force. They don't need to give themselves into the Force if they don't want to. Asajj Ventress' new revelation means that now she belongs in a very small group of enlightened Force users. She belongs in the same ranks as individuals like Ahsoka Tano and Revan, who've walked on both sides of the Force and now realize that the Force is just a tool to be used. The Force does not turn a person into a killer or a madman. The Force does not turn someone into a compassionate saint. That is up to the individual. To blame the Force is like blaming a blaster rifle or a lightsaber for mass crimes against humanity. It makes absolutely no sense. Now, in the latter years of Asajj Ventress' journey, she would partner with Quinlan Vos, and together they would attempt to assassinate Count Dooku. In Quinlan Vos, Asajj found a man so full of love and compassion that his presence almost overwhelms her. When he finds out about Asajj Ventress's past, he shares in her sorrow, and she gives him empathy. For the first time, Asajj Ventress is allowed to feel sorry for herself, and she has someone to share her grief with her. Quinlan Vos is a highly empathetic individual, and he also has the ability to touch items and see their past. And so when he touches things like Asajj Ventress's energy bow, he actually sees the massacre of her tribe firsthand. Quinlan Vos's empathy was really the last piece in the puzzle that is Asajj Ventress's recovery and healing process. I mean, to finally be exposed to this kind of compassion that she was deprived of as a youth has really made her a more whole person. And these seeds of empathy and kindness would begin to root, and Asajj and Quinlan Vos would develop a true loving relationship. But in order to help Quinlan Vos survive his encounter with Dooku, Asajj Ventress wants Quinlan Vos to have every tool available at his disposal, and that includes using the dark side of the Force. Quinlan Vos always walked a fine line between what was acceptable as a Jedi and what was not. It was perhaps for this reason that the Jedi chose him to assassinate Count Dooku in the first place. But when Asajj Ventress first meets Quinlan Vos, he is hesitant to fall into the dark side. He believes still in the Jedi way of doing things. This is always the problem with the Jedi. They're hypocrites. They choose to go to war, which is a very un-Jedi thing to do, and then they attempt to uphold their pre-war ideology, which not only endangers themselves on the battlefield, but also the men beneath their command. Either don't go to war in the first place because it doesn't fit your ideology, or change your ideology so you can properly go to war. And in Quinlan Vos's case, I mean, if you are going to assassinate someone, which is a pretty heinous activity in itself, you also have to let go of your Jedi values. Asajj Ventress would bring Quinlan Vos to Dathomir for this very lesson of tapping into the dark side. You see, the planet Dathomir had a natural connection to the dark side, and the idea was to submerge Quinlan Vos in the anguish and suffering of Asajj Ventress's lost tribe. But of course, this big, bumbling, gentle man was not consumed by hatred. Instead, he's consumed by sorrow, and empathy flows out of him like a fire hydrant, and that almost overwhelms Asajj Ventress's protective shell, and this is completely counterproductive. I mean, they're trying to tap into the dark side, not fill each other with love and hope. But then a black snake appears out of the trees and winds itself around Asajj Ventress's arm. Asajj Ventress would use this snake to demonstrate the power of the dark side to Quinlan Vos. She would coax the snake into her hands, and then she would choke it to death using the Force. Asajj would recount the tale of the death of her master, Kai Narek, who died in her arms. She talked about how it was at this point the dark side completely took her over. It gave her the power to survive and take on the many enemies she was facing. A Jedi has the luxury of holding back their emotions in the safety of their temple, but when put in a desperate situation like the one she was in, one needs every tool available to her, especially when you're going up against someone as formidable as Count Dooku. In the next few days, Ventress would train Quinlan Vos on how to tap into his own dark side, and it was more or less successful. But at the end of this trial, once again, Ventress brings another snake and has Quinlan Vos try to kill it. Now, at first, he's successful at coaxing the snake towards him, using the dark side of the Force to mesmerize the snake, but he's unable to finish the kill, and as a result, the snake bites him and injects a very painful hallucinogenic venom into his bloodstream. Quinlan Vos would writhe in pain and agony for quite some time. Think of this like the equivalent of the Force cave on Dagobah, but instead of facing one's fear, this was all about accepting pain and understanding how to use it to fuel the dark side of the Force within oneself. And so the pauldron on Asajj Ventress's shoulder with the black snake sigil symbolizes her dark side Force ability. Her lightsaber might be yellow now to show her more neutral stance on things, but she always has that pauldron on her shoulder for whenever she needs to tap into the dark side during more dangerous situations. And this is what makes her incredibly formidable. See, unlike most Sith, who fully let the dark side control her, Asajj Ventress is now more concerned about practical things like safety, survival, maybe some credits every now and then. She's a rational individual, and this is why she's a lot deadlier than a Sith. The problem with the Sith is that they're just too chaotic. They never know when to stop. They continuously screw over everyone they meet or kill people for no reason. When you live a life like this, of violence and uncontrolled destruction, the consequences of your action will eventually catch up with you and you will meet your end as a result. This is what happens to almost every Sith in existence. They believe that only through strength and power can they survive. But what they don't realize is it's their pursuit of strength and power that makes them so many enemies in the first place, which is why they need more strength and power. It's a never-ending cycle of madness and chaos. I guess the Sith don't realize that most people can survive by just not creating so many enemies. They can survive with far less combat abilities and paranoia simply by just being a little more chilled out and nicer to people. Seriously, this is a good lesson for everyone in real life. You know, I always see these really angsty posts on Instagram where like, everyone hates me and everyone is against me and like everyone wants me to fail. The truth is, most people do not care what you're doing. They're not really thinking about you. You'll learn about this when you're older. You know, like everyone is focused on their own thing. And when you live your life, it's important to realize that you don't need to fight everyone. As a matter of fact, if you want safety, if you want security, if you want peace in your life, just be chilled out, be friendly, make no enemies, and no enemies will seek you. And this is where Asajj Ventress' mindset is at now. She's finally found some peace. And she's found a new job. She's become a bounty hunter. And she is so well suited for this job, it's not even funny. You know, in the past, I've made lists of the top bounty hunters of the galaxy, and I've always put Asajj Ventress in the top 3. And this pisses off a lot of, Star Wars fans, and I understand. Asajj Ventress is not really known for being a bounty hunter. She's known for being a Sith Assassin. Being a bounty hunter is like a side gig. It's like her driving Uber, after work. Yet despite her picking up this job pretty late in her life, she can easily destroy even the top bounty hunters on this list, whether it's Cad Bane or Boba Fett. As a matter of fact, the whole reason why Asajj Ventress becomes a bounty hunter is because of her first mission as a bounty hunter with Boba Fett, and she completely embarrasses him. So shortly after surviving the massacre of her Night Sister clan, Ventress finds herself on Tatooine drinking some booze in that famous Mos Eisley cantina. A bounty hunter named Oked makes a pass on her while she's just trying to mind her own business, which of course is the dumbest thing you can do to someone like her at that point in her life. And as a result, Oked gets run through by a lightsaber. Now his partners, Bosk and Latarazi, are nearby, but instead of being angry, they see this as a great opportunity. They propose that Asajj replace the bounty hunter she just killed for their next mission. A mission being led by none other than Boba Fett, who despite being a teenager at this time still commands the respect of her peers. The mission was on the planet of Korzite, and it was a relatively simple one. Deliver a train with some precious cargo on board for the local dictator. During the mission, a group of ninjas known as the Cage Warriors would attempt to hijack the train and steal the object. Ventress would prove to be indispensable in these combat situations, as her force abilities made her faster, stronger, and deadlier than anyone else in the outfit. During the skirmish, it's revealed to Ventress that the package that they're guarding is actually a woman, Pluma Sodi, who is about to be wed against her will. Asajj Ventress would immediately sympathize with the young girl and decide to instead put Boba Fett in the chest and then deliver him to the client, which is really funny. She would not only do that, she would also collect the bounty for the mission from the dictator, and then she would deliver Pluma Sodi back to her own people for a fee as well. This way, she can live with herself by saving an innocent, person who's being trafficked as a slave bride, and at the same time, she can really double dip in her earnings here. It's a win-win situation for her. Asajj Ventress is a complete badass. It turns out that the skills she learned as a Sith Assassin made her incredibly competent and deadly as a bounty hunter. Asajj Ventress would continue to sulk around the underworld, kind of just like her male counterpart Maul. But she would stay by herself. She no longer had any ambition for power. She instead just wanted to survive. And if Maul had done the same, he probably would have lived a longer life as well. Asajj Ventress would eventually make it to the underworld of Coruscant, where she would adopt almost a Batman-like vigilante figure. She would essentially protect young, innocent girls from thugs. And imagine when she finally meets up with the Bad Batch on some bounty, most likely, to hunt down the clones, or maybe even Omega, she will be swayed by their decency and by their love for one another. I really hope she doesn't become an enemy to the Bad Batch, because up until this point, she's gone through so much growth and development as a character. Of course, I still don't have to explain how she survived dying, but I guess we'll see. But anyway, I would be lying if I told you I wasn't excited to see her come back and continue her story of redemption. Well, that's it for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. See you next time.